Got the pen and the paper in your hand. Got the story going, but you wanted to expand. We'll help you on your journey, let us lend you a hand. Join the show. So let's write the book TV show. Grab your pen and paper and we're gonna let it flow. Talking about write the book TV. Join the show.
Welcome to Write the Book TV. I'm your host, Kimberly LeBeau. Each week we show up here to interview authors and experts about all things publishing and writing. So if you're someone who's thinking about writing a book, or you know someone else who should, tell them this is the place to be, right here at Write the Book TV. We have an exciting guest here for you today joining us, Dr. Rhonda M Lawson. She is an accomplished and award-winning author and also an amazing editor. We'll talk more about that soon. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rhonda. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I couldn't wait to get you on. So when I say experts, this is what I mean. We have the writers and we have the experts. Dr. Rhonda is the expert around writing and editing, and so I really wanted to share you with our audience. And so, like I said, you are an accomplished and award-winning author, but you write fiction. So
Yes.
A lot of authors that come on write nonfiction, but you what I call the real writer. You write fiction, right? You can make up some stuff. So how many books have you written to date?
Well, I actually have 5 novels. I have 1 novella, and I've contributed to 17 different anthologies.
Wow. 17 anthologies. I thought I loved anthologies. You really love anthologies. What is the title of your latest work?
My latest work is actually the anthology. It's called A New Renaissance, a celebration of African American fiction. And the reason why I called it A New Renaissance is because 100 years ago we had the Harlem Renaissance, which was a celebration of literary works, art, music, and I wanted to be able to celebrate those trailblazers because 100 years later we are still celebrating literacy. We're still celebrating writing, music, and art. So I wanted to bring all of that together in A New Renaissance.
And so that's an anthology, so that's fictional stories though.
Absolutely. The book is filled with authors who wrote their own fiction. So it's all original fiction, a whole bunch of different stories. So we have stories ranging from friendships to relationships. We have children's stories in there. And all of them are so different. You don't feel like you're reading the same story throughout the book. I think that's the special part about it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Like when most people think of anthologies, they think nonfiction.
Right.
And so to have a fiction anthology, I just think that's incredible. I tried my hand at it once, as you know. It's not as easy as it looks. That's why I say you're the real author writing this fiction. And so I want you to talk a little bit about your journey as a writer. Like, did you start writing as a child? Was it always something you wanted to do? Because you've written a lot and written well. And so where did that start for you?
I actually started reading at a very young age. I used to love to read. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. If I didn't have a book, I was reading the signs on the wall. We're always reading. And I used to love, Reader's Digest. I used to like to look at the little stories at the end, when people would send in their own stories.
Yeah.
So as I got a little older, I was about 12, I decided to try my hand at writing my own stories because I was reading a lot. The librarians at my school knew me because I was always in the library.
Wow.
So I decided to write my own stories, but I never did anything with them. I didn't even know how to get published. I just enjoyed writing my own stories. And I would pass them around to my friends so they could read it. And they were like, okay, what happens next?
So you had beta readers from
before
they were called beta readers, right?
Right. So it wasn't actually until after I joined the Army that I decided to really try to pursue writing a story professionally. And the first time I wrote the book, I was just writing it at home. I would be writing while I was watching TV, or if it was late at night and I didn't have anything to do, I would write my story. And then I passed it to a couple of my battle buddies, that's what we called them in the Army, my battle buddies, and asked them to let me know what they thought. I tried to get it published. I still didn't know how to do it. I didn't know the right people, so I didn't know what that process was. I was just kind of sending it out to people and hoping. All I knew was that you have to have an agent, so I would just send it to agents.
Wow.
Right. So it really wasn't until something very tragic happened actually. When in 2003. There was a sergeant major in the Army who I really, really admired. He was the director of our church choir. Everybody loved him. He was a very big guy. He was, he always looked intimidating when you saw him, but he was a really nice guy and very knowledgeable and very respected. And after I went to Egypt, I had left my military base in Washington State at Fort Lewis, and I had moved to Egypt. And while I was in Egypt, that sergeant major was in a helicopter that was shot down. And when I found out about it, I just cried and cried because, I just pictured him on that helicopter, probably still encouraging soldiers, probably still smiling and cracking jokes. And I just pictured him on that plane or on that helicopter when he was shot down. And so about a day or two later, I was thinking about him. I said, he probably died knowing that he did everything that God meant for him to do. I said, I need to do what God meant for me to do. So I need to stop sitting on this book. And I went ahead and I got the book. I read over it again, and did as much as I could do to it because I didn't even have an editor. I had just written the book, but because I was a pretty good writer, the book wasn't terribly written. I just didn't have it professionally edited. So I went ahead and sent it out to probably 17 different agents and publishing houses. And a publishing house wrote me back. I don't even know if they still exist anymore. They were called Jada Press. Okay. And they sent me an email, and the subject line said, "Publishing contract and welcome to Jada Press." And I was like, "Oh my God!"
And everybody wants, right?
And it just so happened that I was the first African American author that this particular publishing house ever had. Okay. Yeah, so that was exciting to me, and that was how my first book, Cheating in the Next Room, came into fruition.
That's really good. Of all of the books that you have written, what is your favorite one and why?
That's like asking a mother to choose her favorite child.
Right?
But all of my books are special to me for different reasons. However, I will say that my book Twilight, which is about sexual assault, is the one I really hold dear, only because it deals with such a tough subject. Yeah. And it's teenage sexual assault. And in the book, my main character, Twilight, is brutally raped by her much older boyfriend. And this was a man that her parents were trying to keep her away from, and she finally decided she was going to listen to her parents, and he didn't want to accept that. And when the assault happens, she first blames herself. How could I be so stupid? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And then it's the entire process of how a young woman gets past something that tragic that happens to her and still is able to, pursue life. Because she was ready to give up on things. And another reason why I really value that story is because two of my main characters from my prior books were in the book as well. So,
a real writer.
So, Alexis from Cheating in the Next Room, she's the young woman who has the affair. People would always ask me whatever happened to her. I'm like, I just want to see her growth. And I couldn't believe she was the favorite character. I thought she was going to be the hated character. Yeah. And the wife was going to be the favorite. But everybody loved Alexis. So I kept Alexis around for a few books. And I felt like it was time for her to meet Isis, who was the main character from my second book, A Dead Rose. Now, Isis was a young woman who had a bad reputation. She was known for being the easy girl. And she wanted to get past that, and she wanted to, get married and have a real relationship. And she thought she found the one, and then she found out that that one wasn't actually the one. And so she went through a lot, and she eventually becomes a sexual assault victims advocate.
Oh, wow.
And Alexis becomes a doctor. And throughout all of the books, we talk about her process into becoming a doctor. So when this incident happens to Twilight, her doctor is Alexis. And when a sexual assault happens, the police come and they always send a sexual assault victims advocate.
Yes.
and the victim's advocate that they sent happened to be ISIS. So that's how ISIS and Alexis
all
meet.
together.
Right.
That is awesome. So, what are some of the things what are some of the things a writer has to consider when they are writing fiction?
I think sometimes people don't realize how tough the process of writing fiction really is.
Yeah.
Like for instance, when I did a New Renaissance, there were some authors who wanted to be a part of it, but they didn't know how to write fiction. They knew how to write nonfiction. They were great at that. But when it came to writing a story, that where you need to capture people's imagination, the process was a little tougher for them. So some of the things you want to think about is, for instance, when we live our daily lives, there are times where all we're doing is just sitting watching TV, or we go to the bathroom, or we scratch our heads. Those are little actions that we don't think about. And so we have to think about those actions in terms of our characters so we can make our characters real people and make them more three-dimensional. You know, we can't just say that they were sitting on the sofa and then in the next paragraph they're in the kitchen. Show me the process where they moved,
get there, right?
Where they thought about being hungry and walking to the kitchen. So sometimes you have to bring in those details, but then you don't need to bring in every detail. We don't need to know when your character has to use the bathroom unless that is something that's important to the story.
Right.
Did they go to the bathroom and while they were in the bathroom something happened? Or did they go through a thought process while, they were doing their business? Sometimes when you have to sit there for a while, you have to do your business. And those thoughts come in your head. So think about everything that you do should help to move the story along. But you don't want to skip those details that make your character feel human.
Yeah.
Because that's the way a reader is going to identify with that character. For instance, when I wrote about Isis and A Dead Rose, I needed people to connect with her. I needed people to see why she did the things that she did. Why did she become the easy girl, so to speak? Yeah. And what was she doing to get past that? And I wanted you to really understand her thought process. So there were certain details I needed to put in there so people could understand that. And yes, I had some people say they wanted to shake ISIS, and I had some people saying that they loved ISIS.
That's when you know the character is good. Right?
Yes. When the person makes you mad,
yes,
when the character makes you mad, yes.
Yeah. So how do you come up with your characters and their personalities?
Sometimes I just think back to people I may have experienced throughout life. I mean, some people think that fiction is just a quasi-autobiography. And it's not. Authors do have imaginations. I mean, I'm never going to write about my entire life in a fiction book. Right. However, I may take aspects from my life and aspects from things that I may have seen on TV or aspects of things that I might have seen in conversation. I'm an ear hustler without being nosy. And what I mean by that is sometimes I might hear a conversation that sparks my interest. I have no care whatsoever what they're really talking about. I'm really not going to talk about them later and gossip about them. I'm not going to put them on Facebook. But sometimes I like to hear the course of that conversation because it helps me to understand human nature. That's one of the reasons why I started watching some reality shows. Some. Because I like to see how people respond to certain things. And that was one of the reasons why I started watching them. It's just so I could see that interaction. Yeah. But I think that helps me with my character development. But at the same time, I don't want my characters to be stereotypical. Just because my character's from the South does not mean she's going to say, I do declare, Or I don't want my characters to feel like something that you saw on a movie. And sometimes I see that, especially when I see people try to create characters who are police detectives. Okay. They try to make them sound like something they may have seen on Law and Order or something like that. So I try not to do that, but at the same time, I still want it to be realistic. So sometimes when I wrote Twilight, I had a friend who was a police officer, and I asked him to read the police station scenes for me. And he said, no, that wouldn't happen that way. I said, well, I really want this scene in here, but yeah, that would never happen like that. I said, okay, well, let me just go ahead and rewrite it so I can still make sure the scene makes sense, but at the same time, address that this wouldn't actually happen.
That's a good segue into the next question of what type of research has to be done to write fiction?
Well, like I said, you need your characters to feel real. If you're writing a story about a photographer, then they should, if they're a professional photographer, they're going to be using certain equipment. They're not going to be just using a Polaroid camera unless they just like Polaroid cameras. And if they do, make it make sense. Why do they like Polaroid cameras? But I would do research on the type of equipment that they will be using, so that makes the character make sense.
Okay.
If the character is a hairdresser, I want to make sure that I'm doing some research so what they're doing sounds like something that an actual hairdresser would do.
Right.
If the character lives in a certain city, I'll tell you, being from New Orleans, I cannot stand when people try to write a book about a character in New Orleans and they make them go to all the stereotypical places. We're not going to Cafe Du Monde for breakfast. If we happen to be in the French Quarter, we'll stop at Cafe Du Monde and get some powdered donuts, but we're not going to make a trip over to Cafe Du Monde for breakfast.
Yeah.
So when I see something like that, I know this person isn't really from New Orleans. Or when they say, I'm going to go eat at a certain restaurant because that's the restaurant that they happen to see on the Food Network. Visitors might do that, but New Orleanians who live there every day, some of us didn't find out about those restaurants until they were on the Food Network.
Oh, wow.
It's true.
Are there any authors that have influenced your work?
Oh, yes. Well, I always talk about the late, great Eric Jerome Dickey, and not just because I love this work, but which I absolutely did love his work. And one thing I admired about him is that he was a perpetual learner. He had written so many books, but he was always trying to get better. And then I see authors out here with 1 or 2 books who don't want to read and don't want to take a course because they feel they know it all because they have 1 or 2 books. This man has written dozens of books, and he was still learning. He was still reading the Writer's Guide. You know, he was still reading on ways that he could make his fiction better. And if you look at his latest works compared to his earlier works, you can see the writing style had totally changed because he was a perpetual learner. So that's one thing that I had always admired about him. Another thing is I actually did a book signing where I got to sit next to him. And not only did he buy my book, I don't even know if he read it, but the fact that he wanted to buy my book and support me, I really appreciated that. And I was like, you gonna read it? He was like, just let me buy the book. I was like, okay, fine. But one thing he told me that I'll never forget when it came to plot development. He said that when you are working on your plot, drop hints. So you're telling the reader what's happening without telling them what's gonna happen. So in other words, when the plot twist happens, it shouldn't really come as a shock to anybody because you were dropping hints that they didn't realize. So they can go back and say, oh, that makes sense why you did this or this. But drop it in such a way to where it's not obvious that you are dropping a hint.
Right.
So that's something that always stuck with me.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about editing. A lot of people do not even know that there are different types of editing.
Yes.
Right? And they think it's just one editor for everything. So educate us today about editing because you are a phenomenal editor.
Well, thank you so much for that. Well, there are a few different types of editing, and I actually have a slideshow on my Instagram that talks about the different types of editing. But there is the developmental edit. That's what I like to do, is the developmental edit. So, I will be looking at your spelling and grammar, but I'm also going to look at the flow of your story. I'm going to be looking at timelines. I'm going to be looking at your characters and making sure that they had the right motivations. I'll put a lot of questions, and I like to say it goes down in the margins.
Yes.
Because I'm going to be putting comments all throughout the margins.
Yes.
Comments and questions like, well, why did he do this? Or what was his reasoning for doing that? Or why does it seem like he's only attracted to this? And I'll ask these questions because it helps you to develop your story. So that would be what a developmental editor would do. You have a proofreader. A proofreader is not going to do anything to your story. For me, that's the most frustrating kind of editing for me. Only because you have paid me to make sure that there are no misspellings or grammatical mistakes. That's all I'm supposed to do with a proof. And I'll get there saying, well, can I change this sentence? No, that's not what they paid me to do.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes that can be tough, but I would say a proofreader is a great person to have at the very end of the process. Once you've had a good developmental edit and you're just about to go to publication, it's good. And then I'll tell you, a proofreader is also good because when you have gone through the editing process and the writing process and the publisher wants you to go ahead and look over your proof one more time before it goes to print, you just don't feel like reading it anymore. So, I mean, let's just be real.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
sometimes it's good to hire a proofreader. Okay, and you'll let them know this is the proof that's going to print. All I need you to do is make sure that there are no grammatical, punctuation, or spelling mistakes. And I've actually had to bring a proofreader on my team because after I've done a developmental edit, there might be a couple things I forgot or a couple of things I missed. So sometimes having somebody with fresh eyes to come in and just pick up those little things, it goes a long way.
See, this is why you needed to come on the show.
I'm just glad you
Right? Time goes so fast in these things. So make sure you tell everyone where they can find you. Social media, website, and then of course how they can find your books.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, my website is www.mtwimagesolutions.com. And if you go to my website, you're going to get this pop-up banner that is going to offer you a free author success guide. And in that author success guide, I have information on how you can get the motivation to write your book. And there are also free, mid-range, and more expensive or premium tips on how to market your book. So go get that author success guide. Like I said, it's absolutely free. Then if you go to my work with me page, I have information on how you might be able to work with me through VIP days, my talk show Horizons, the Horizons Author Lounge. What else do I have on there? If you need information with on how to get publicity for your work, all of that is on there. And you can also schedule a free discovery call if you would like information on getting your work edited or even book coaching, which is what the VIP day is. What you can actually do is sign up to have a VIP day with me. I'll do an onboarding call with you where we'll find out where you are with your project. And then we will schedule a actual VIP day where we can get together either in person or on Zoom. And we will work on your project all day. Just me and you working on your project.
Are your books there as well?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. The books are on the site as well. If you go to the shop site. And I also have, oh my goodness, merchandise. Yes, I have merchandise for authors as well as readers. I'm talking t-shirts, I'm talking coffee mugs, anything that you might think of. So just go to the website, www.mtwimagesolutions.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
Yes. This was so good. Thank you so much for coming to share with our audience. I know they had to have learned a lot on today.
I hope so. I really love talking about this.
Yes. And to our viewing audience, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Write the Book TV. And like I said, if you're someone who's thinking about writing a book, or you know someone else who should be writing a book, tell them that this is the place to be, Write the Book TV. And if you have a question that you want answered on the segment, be sure to visit www.writethebooktv.com. Drop us your question and maybe we'll answer it on one of the upcoming episodes. Take care. Bye-bye.
So let's write the book TV show. Grab your pen and paper.